What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the fantasy headliners, and we're ready to talk about some start and sit for the tight end position here in week 6. Week 5 was a little bit of a mess at the tight end position. Guys like George Kittle, Zach Ertz, and others did absolutely nothing, and they were not able to get us to those 10 half PPR points to be able to consider them a hit. So last week's percentage looking a little bit down. We'll throw it up here on the screen so you can take a look at it. Last week only at 63%. Some of my hits: Mike Gesicki, Evan Ingram, Hayden Hurst. Had Hurst as a sit last week. Jared Cook, Gerald Everett, Jimmy Graham, all of them misses. One thing I do just want to bring up to you real quick as well, why it's really just an awesome tool to be a part of our MVP Patreon package is because of Darren Fells specifically. So last week, Fells was a sit and Aiken was a start for me. I like the matchup, thought Aiken could get himself a touchdown and get past those 10 PPR points. Well, I get on and log on to Discord just a few minutes before the game start, and I see Jordan Aiken is inactive. So I immediately messaged all of our MVP Patreon members and said, hey, we've got Jordan Aiken out today. Darren Fells is jumping up into the top 15 for me, and he's going to be a start now because Aiken is out. Being able to adjust on the fly with those last minute changes, people being out, injuries that pop up, really help us get that information out to you. So if you're still interested in being a part of that package, you can do so down at the link below. Go over to Patreon. The MVP tier gets you into our Discord channel that allows you to access Jake and I personally, along with all of our other MVP Patreon members. So enough of that. Let's go ahead and jump into it. And let's talk about our first matchup of week 6. Denver at New England in week 6, and Noah Fant is really the only guy that I'm keeping an eye on here, and unfortunately he is going to be a sit for me as of right now. He is back to practice. It looks like he could potentially get back this week, but it's his first game back after the injury, and New England's allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game. It's on the road. It's really tough for me to want to rely on Noah Fant this week. Now, he could end up coming really close to those 10 points. He could just end up going over it. I think he's going to be really close. For right now, to me, he is a sit. Now, if things come out over the week and I see he's a full go, he's practicing in full, there's no issues, nothing like that, maybe we change our minds, because I don't really love the passing game this week either for Denver, and Fant may have to be a weapon that they heavily rely on, so we'll continue to monitor it. As of right now, though, Fant is going to be the only option in this game at tight end that I will consider. He is a sit for right now, though, as is everybody else in this game, and we'll talk more about it later in the week if we want to move him to a start. Houston and Tennessee, and the guy that I brought up at the beginning of the show, Darren Fells, is going to be a start for me this week if Jordan Aiken ends up being out. Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be ready to go? Again, something we will monitor throughout the week. As of right now, though, Aiken will be a sit and Darren Fells will be a start. Tennessee is allowing 16.75 fantasy points per game to opposing tight end. So whoever is really going to be that receiving threat at tight end this week definitely could end up doing some damage. If Aikens is out, Fells is going to be in a really good position and definitely is going to be a top 15 option for me this week. Jonnu Smith. You know your boy brought him up at the beginning of the season, right? He was our breakout candidate. Absolutely loved him. The dude has smashed. And if you look at his fantasy points right now, they look good, okay? But keep in mind, they've played a game less already. And as of right now, he is the #1 overall tight end in terms of fantasy points per game after scoring 2 touchdowns in the Tuesday night game this week. So Jonnu Smith is an absolute must start for us every single week. I don't think there's any more questions about it. If you own Jonnu Smith and you don't own Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Darren Waller, George Kittle, he is in your lineup absolutely no matter what. For Cleveland and Pittsburgh, as good as this matchup looks for the wide receivers, it's a little bit more daunting for the tight ends. For Cleveland, we're going to get back to sitting Austin Hooper. You know, when David Njoku was out, he had one game that went well, a couple of other games that were okay, but David Njoku is back, and after finally being in the lineup last week, I wouldn't be surprised if they start to split a little bit more with him and Hooper. Again, Njoku is more of a receiving threat right now than what Hooper is. Hooper, again, is kind of that guy that's in there, is a 6th lineman, blocking a lot, hasn't really put up a lot of volume this week. So both of them are going to be sits for me, especially going up against Pittsburgh, that allows under 10 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. For Eric Ebron, he was really close last week. He was right on the border of being a hit. He just missed it. I think if he would have had like 5 more yards, he would have ended up being a hit. Just missed it last week. But we're going to go back to him as a start again this week. Cleveland is allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And Eric Ebron is in a position definitely where he could turn in a touchdown next week. And a game that's going to have a lot of back and forth and will probably be one of the more higher total point games of the entire weekend. Baltimore at Philadelphia. Mark Andrews, 100% a start for us this week. Another great matchup going up against Philadelphia that allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So expect a whole lot of Marquise Brown and a whole lot of Mark Andrews this week. Mark Andrews, a good bet to find the end zone once again. On the flip side for Philadelphia, Zach Ertz has been awful. Not okay, not bad, awful. Zach Ertz at this point, we can't rely on him, okay? And I know a lot of you drafted him in the hopes of him being your number 1 tight end and a guy that you can rely on weekly. But if you have access to any of the other start options in this video, you should roll with them. Zach Ertz at this point, if he was even putting up okay games, I would say let's stick it out. But they're not even okay. They're bad. The offense doesn't look good. Ertz doesn't look good. The offensive line doesn't look good. Wentz doesn't look good. Receivers are hurt. Everybody, there's just a flat out issue with the offense right now in Philadelphia. So until we see Zach Ertz pick it up, we can't rely on him, and I'm not going to trust him in my lineup, and I'm certainly not going to tell you to trust him in yours anymore. Washington and the New York Giants, and for Washington, Logan Thomas officially off the train. Logan Thomas, to begin the year, I was like, I'm not really feeling it. I didn't really talk about Logan Thomas that much, didn't really have him that high in my rankings, and I got a lot of questions about him, and I was like, I'm just not feeling it. Well, to begin the season, he looked good. He started the season good, was playing a high percentage of snaps, was getting a ton of targets, and then now he's not. The targets are not going to him anymore. And even with Kyle Allen and Alex Smith in the game last week, he still didn't see any volume. So for right now, we're going to be done with him. Now, with Kyle Allen at quarterback, anything could potentially change, but if it does, we'll react to that later. We're not going to be proactive trying to put him in our lineup going forward. For the New York Giants, yeah, Evan Ingram almost put up a stinker in the passing game last week and really saved his week because he had a rushing touchdown. Well, he gets a decent matchup. Washington allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. I would assume that at some point in time, they're going to get Ingram more involved. Daniel Jones just has not looked good so far this season. Is it the new game plan? Is it the new playbook? Or is everybody off after being injured most of the year last year? Evan Ingram and Daniel Jones, at the beginning of last season when Daniel Jones first came in, him and Evan Ingram looked pretty good together. And then Evan Ingram goes down and then just didn't end up materializing. At some point, though, it's going to end up happening. He continues to get a decent amount of targets, even though he didn't get very much last week. And with such a great matchup, I would really expect this offense to utilize him better this season. So hopefully they grow a little bit. Hopefully they realize that he might be the most dynamic playmaker on that side of the ball right now, outside of Darius Slayton, and they get him the targets a little bit more often. So again, a start for me this week, but he will be a little bit lower just to account for some of that unexpected floor we've been seeing from him recently. Atlanta and Minnesota, and Hayden Hurst is going back to that sit column for another week for me. I was worried about him when the season started, and so far through 5 weeks, he's only really had 1 week where we're like, yep, this is a guy that we can play on a consistent basis. Who knows what happens moving forward? If they have someone else calling plays now, if they have a little bit of a different offensive mind going through this, if they decide to switch up the game plan a little bit, maybe they do focus on Hurst a little bit more. But again, last year, part of the reason Austin Hooper had a breakout season, and I've said this over and over, was because they had no run game last year. They used Austin Hooper and those short yardage situations over the middle that really allowed him to be that, playmaker on those easy targets, on those high percentage targets, because they weren't able to run the ball, so they were doing it in the passing game instead. But Todd Gurley, after a big week last week, still looks good. So they're running the ball a lot more effectively, so they haven't had to really utilize him in that type of an aspect. We'll see moving forward. For right now, though, I'm going to go ahead and list him as a sit. It also depends on Julio. If Julio ends up being out another week, maybe we have to go back and take another look at it. But for right now, we're moving on from Hayden Hurst. And then for Minnesota, Irv Smith Jr. is going to be a start for me this week. And the stat line we saw for him last week is what I was expecting at the beginning of the season. Now, I will tell you, I missed on Adam Thielen. I absolutely did. I had him as a do not draft this year. And one of the reasons why is because of what we just saw from Irv Smith Jr. in week 5. He gets 5 targets, 4 receptions, and 64 yards. I was expecting the tight ends to be utilized a lot more in this offense. Add in the fact that this is a heavy running scheme, and also on top of it, Justin Jefferson, trying to get him going in his rookie season. You know, what could end up happening? I thought Thielen's ceiling just wasn't where it was at last year. Obviously, that hasn't been the case, but I am happy to see them finally getting the tight end into the flow here, because they absolutely need to do that to open up a whole nother aspect of this offense that could really allow Kirk Cousins to utilize another weapon. So I'm going to go ahead and run with Irv Smith Jr. because my hope is that what we saw last week is kind of the game plan moving forward with him. Now, am I going to start Kyle Rudolph? No, I won't. Irv Smith Jr. is more of that receiving threat there, but I'm going to go with him, especially in a matchup with the Atlanta Falcons that allow the second most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Detroit and Jacksonville, and TJ Hawkinson is going to be a start for me again this week. It feels like a while since I've been able to put him in the start column, but he's getting a matchup against Jacksonville, a team that allows over 16 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and they're coming out of the bye, okay? Matt Patricia at this point is probably fearing for his coaching life a little bit. I think you would have to, okay? If he's not, then he's not much of a head coach. If you don't look at this team and realize you're in trouble, you got to do something. And on the offensive side of the ball, part of that would be utilizing a guy that you spend a top 10 pick on, okay? You don't draft tight ends in the top 10 and not utilize them. So my hope is with this bye week, they were able to take some extra time, look at game film, change some things up this past week, work on it, and part of it is going to be utilizing TJ Hawkinson more. It is a good matchup, and hopefully they are going to utilize him more, and if they do, he is definitely a guy with top 12 potential this week. For Jacksonville, though, not a whole lot over there. Again, Tyler Eifert dealing with a little bit of a neck injury, may not even end up playing. And then, of course, you got O'Shaughnessy. He hasn't done anything yet either, though, this season. So both of those guys will continue to be sits just because they've utilized the wide receiver so much. And then, of course, the run game with James Robinson. Cincinnati and Indianapolis, and this is an Indianapolis team that does not allow a whole lot of ceiling through the air. They really do a good job of smothering teams, and Cincinnati could find themselves with some issues this week, really trying to exploit that defense. And part of the things that the defense does so well is they limit tight ends. They limit them to the fewest fantasy points per game among teams in the NFL. So for Cincinnati and Drew Sample, not really feeling Drew Sample this week. I felt him in weeks past, thought he should be a start, but they haven't really utilized him either over the last couple of weeks the way that they were utilizing the position to begin the season. So Drew Sample, I will skip out on him this week. But the Indianapolis Colts make for a complex situation at tight end because now they have 3 healthy tight ends, all of which are seeing time on the field. We've got Mo Cox, Mo Problems. We've got Jack Mother and Doyle, and of course Trey Burton, who I also need to come up with a nickname for, and we'll be working on that the rest of the week. So who am I going to start this week? Typically, I would say with this many tight ends, it's going to be nobody. But I'm actually going to start Trey Burton while sitting Doyle and Mo Cox, okay? Now, the Cincinnati Bengals allow over 13 fantasy points per game, and Trey Burton was number 2 in targets on the Colts last week. He has come out since being healthy, and he has gotten the most snaps and run the most routes at the tight end position. So, Trey Burton is obviously 100% a guy that they are trying to work into the game plan every single week, and this could be the week where we finally see him put together the type of fantasy performance that a lot of people thought they'd be getting from him in Chicago when he joined Matt Nagy there. We just had to wait a little bit for that breakout, but it might finally be arriving, and Indianapolis may be the team to do that. Chicago and Carolina, and Jimmy Graham really kind of rejuvenated over the last few weeks and looks like kind of like the Jimmy Graham of old back in New Orleans. And even though this is a tough matchup against Carolina that doesn't give a whole lot of fantasy points up to opposing tight ends, we're going to roll with him this week because he's really becoming that number 2 target behind Allen Robinson. I mean, right now on the team, he's second in targets and first in touchdowns. So I am going to start him this week because he continues to find the end zone. For Ian Thomas, we're going to list him as a start. We listed him as a start last week. He didn't do anything. We're going to go back to it again this week. Why? Chicago is tough against the pass. I'm already concerned about Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore this week. If that happens, Teddy Bridgewater is going to have to move the ball a little bit, right? How are they going to do that? They might end up doing it with the tight end. Chicago does give up over 14 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and maybe this is a week where Ian Thomas can find the end zone again, which would basically make him a start in most half PPR and PPR formats. So we're going to go back to Ian Thomas. Just expect that ceiling to be a little bit on the lower side and the floor to be a little bit on the lower side, but I definitely think he can find someplace in the middle, and as long as he scores, he'll end up being a start. For the Jets and Dolphins, Herndon's going to be a sit, Griffin's going to be a sit, but Gesicki will be a start for me again this week. Had a little bit of a bounce-back performance last week, 95 yards on 5 receptions. Yeah, he didn't find the end zone, but got back to being utilized a little bit more, and with the way Miami looked, maybe that, maybe something correlates there, okay? Miami looked a lot better last week after struggling in the couple previous weeks. Maybe that was because they were not utilizing Mike Gesicki the way that they should have, and they weren't throwing the ball to him as often. They get back to Gesicki a little bit last week. They have a big week. They can do the same thing again this week. So for Gesicki owners, I definitely think you're in for a safe week this week because he should see plenty of volume. I wouldn't dare sit Robert Tonyan coming off a 3-touchdown performance a couple of weeks ago. I already mentioned in my waiver wire video, a lot of people were questioning me, where's Robert Tonyan? Why don't you have him ranked this week? And I had to respond to all of you fools, he's on a bye. It's all right. I get it. Y'all were excited for him. I was too. He was a big call for me in that week. He was a start for me. He was on the waiver wire video. He was ranked inside the top 15. You should have even had him higher that week. But we're going to go back to him this week. Why? Because, Aaron Rodgers is looking his way, and when Aaron Rodgers finds a target he likes, he typically will run with it a little bit. Will Devontae Adams be back this week? Who's going to be the wide receiver too? It sounds like Equanimeous St. Brown might be coming back this week. Robert Tonyan could really find himself as being that number 2 target again, though, so he's going to be a start because the ceiling is going to be pretty high once again. For Tampa Bay, Brate and Gronk are both going to be sits for me. Green Bay allows the 6th fewest fantasy points per game. I really think Tom Brady is going to end up staying away from both of those guys. They're not going to have a whole lot of upside. Only thing that concerns me is Brate finding the end zone. If Brate finds the end zone and I have him as a sit, he'll probably end up being a miss because he's going to be close to those 10 points. But again, too, Brate's a guy that could go 1 for 2 and a touchdown, similar to what Mike Evans seems to be doing recently, and he'll come under that 10. He'll still end up being a sit anyway. For the Rams in San Francisco, Higbee and Everett are both going to be sits for me this week. Everett was really utilized well last week for the Los Angeles Rams, and even though he didn't play nearly as many snaps as what Tyler Higbee did or run as many routes, he was targeted when he was out there running those routes. Jared Goff was looking his way, and I mentioned it in my video last week. What is Sean McVay doing here? Like, we thought we saw this offense going one way, then we saw it going another way. Is it going back to that 12 personnel? Someone commented and said, why are you confused? You're a fantasy analyst. It doesn't matter what the head coach wants. He's doing it on purpose. That's fine. I just don't know which directions he's going. And I was just emphasizing that because it's making it really tough to call this tight end situation. I didn't love Tyler Higbee to start the year. Why? Because I expected to see a lot of 12 personnel with both him and Everett on the field. And to begin the year, that's what we saw. Then Everett gets banged up a little bit. Van Jefferson was playing well. Reynolds had a decent game. And all of a sudden we saw this team move back to 3 wide receivers, putting Cooper Kupp in the slot, Jefferson or Reynolds outside, and then Higbee at tight end position. Well, all of a sudden we're kind of going back to 12 personnel again now. And that's what makes things so complicated because who's going to be the guy? If Gerald Everett keeps getting more snaps and more targets, he's a guy that, again, up until he went down with that injury last year, was the number 1 tight end in Los Angeles. Can we trust Tyler Higbee going forward? If anything, right now that ceiling is really low. Yeah, he's kind of a boomer bust guy for me. He definitely could go out there and put up 2 touchdowns in a game and look fantastic, and then come back the next week and look like garbage. It really just depends on what the game plan is going into the week. And this week they're going up against San Francisco, who allows the 10th fewest fantasy points per game. So I really could end up seeing both of these guys on the field up against a team that is so tough on tight ends. Why is that? Because they might be tough on one tight end, but are they going to be able to be tough on 2? If you got 2 really athletic tight ends out here like this, one of them is going to end up escaping the coverage, or whoever's going to be looking at those tight ends. Someone's going to normally be able to get away and be a mismatch, because the tight end is going to be a mismatch for a lot of linebackers, especially athletic guys like this, and a lot of slot corners. So it really depends on what they do. And that's why this week, because it's not a great matchup, I'm going to go ahead and skip on both of them, because I haven't really been able to tell what they're going to do with it. I'm going to whisper to him, though, okay? I'm going to get Sean McVay on the phone. McV is what I call him. Yo, McV, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. I'm going to get him on the phone. We're going to talk a little bit. And hopefully next week I'll have a little bit better of an idea for you. Over to San Francisco, because I've talked more than enough at this point about this matchup. Kittle, he's a start. Why? Because he's a beast. He gets enough targets, and he's one of the best tight ends in the league. Start him. KC in Buffalo and Kansas City, obviously, when you've got Travis Kelce, he's a start for you. You smash that start button, you put him in your lineup at tight end every single week. For Buffalo, with Tyler Kroft and Dawson Knox, neither of those guys are going to be a start. All the volume goes out to the wide receivers right now, and they've got 4 wide receivers that are doing a really good job. John Brown's a little bit banged up, right? That's fine, but Gabriel Davis has done a really good job filling in. Cole Beasley has been a guy that's done a great job. Stephon Diggs, one of the best wide receivers in the league right now. So all the volume is going out there, and who knows, maybe they decide to add a Le'Veon Bell this week. You never know with the Bills. It might be a little bit of an upgrade, and if it does, that's just more targets that have to go to somebody. So for both of those guys, not nearly a high enough ceiling, not nearly a high enough floor. They're both sits. Arizona and Dallas, and for Arizona, just another reminder, Dan Arnold is not a thing. For those of you that yelled at me in the offseason that Dan Arnold was a stash, he's still not a thing, people. Nobody is. They don't utilize the tight end position there, so don't worry about it. For Dallas, though, we're going to go with Dalton Schultz as a start this week. Why is that? Well, keep in mind that Andy Dalton, who's the new starting quarterback, used to have a pretty good relationship with a weapon when he was in Cincinnati. Who was that weapon? Well, when he was healthy, it was Tyler Eifert. That's right. Tyler Eifert was a big touchdown threat and a big target for Andy Dalton. It was a great connection. So it wouldn't surprise me if Andy Dalton is looking towards Dalton Schultz a little bit this week and targeting him quite often. Not only that, but Amari Cooper might be a little bit banged up. I don't think it's a great matchup for Michael Gallup. So Andy Dalton could be looking to Dalton Schultz quite a bit this week. And because of that, he will definitely be a start for me. There you have it, Headliner Nation. My start and sits for the tight end position here in week 6. Hit that like button for me down below. If you appreciate the content, you like what you're getting here, hit the like button as always. In the comments, if you got a question about any of the guys, let me know. As always, I'll get to as many as possible. And of course, if you're new to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button and become a part of Headliner Nation today. Do me a favor, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.